After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, with him. He led them up a high mountain. They were alone. There, in front of them, his appearance changed. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as light. Just then, Moses and Elijah appeared in front of them. Moses and Elijah were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters. One will be for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While Peter was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them. A voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, and I love him. I am very pleased with him. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they were terrified. They fell with their faces to the ground. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. They came down the mountain. On the way down, Jesus told them what to do. "Don't tell anyone what you have seen," he said. "Wait until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." The disciples asked him, "Why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah has to come first?" Jesus replied, "That's right. Elijah is supposed to come and make all things new again. But I tell you, Elijah has already come. People don't recognize him. They have done to him everything they wanted to do. And the same they are going to make the Son of Man suffer." Then the disciples understood that Jesus was talking to them about John the Baptist.
Thanks, buddy. All right, that's God's Word. Now, there are a few announcements I want to touch on a little bit. In a couple weeks, the men are going to go to No Regrets Men's Conference and would love to have you join. If you are a guy, we will be leaving here from the church at 7:20. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes to get up to Greentown, and that should give us plenty of time. But it'll be a great time. There's some great speakers. It's a simulcast out of Wisconsin, and so churches all over are hosting it. But some great speakers. It's just $15 for the day, and that includes lunch. So that's pretty good. Just want to draw attention to Winter Jam. Winter Jam's coming up really soon. It's a week after that, February 11th. The Soup or Chili Cook-Off Bowl. If you are interested in submitting soup or chili or even bringing something else to serve alongside the soup, that would be great. We're just going to have a little fun of our own with the Super Bowl party. Also, volleyball, second and fourth Sundays, just so you're interested, know about that. And Ray already mentioned the new Sunday school class that's going to be happening. Maybe you have heard, but Ladies' Bible Study is now on Thursday mornings at 10. So if you're able to come on Thursday and you knew like you wouldn't be able to go on Friday, they switched it to be able to get some more people, hopefully. But Mary's going to be teaching that, and look forward to hearing from you guys how that goes. So like Jenny said, we are in the season of Epiphany. Basically, it's Jesus appearing, or this manifestation, or basically, he's trying to get our attention. He's trying to say, hey, look at me. And all around the world, basically, it's people trying to get attention. Now, this past week, I was driving south on 135, and what did I see? The Liberty Tax person dressing up as, I'm drawing a blank. Statue of Liberty. Why, right? Like, that's an amazing, like, but she had a beard. Like, that's just doesn't make sense to me. Like, it gets your attention. A few weeks ago, I went to a mall, and we were hosting a job fair, and one of the things that we tried to do to get attention was I got to wear the cow suit. Don't tell anybody, I'm not supposed to share that I was the cow, right? Like, that's fun. But getting people's attention is fun, and people are doing it all the time. People are getting on TikTok and making these videos to get people's attention. People want to get attention. You ask a child today, 50% of children, when asked what they want to do when they grow up, they want to be famous. 50%. Well, they want to be famous. It doesn't matter how they get there. They just want to be famous. It doesn't have to do with money. It doesn't have to do with power. They just want to be known. That's interesting if you ask me. They just want to be known. But it's all about Jesus getting attention. That's what Epiphany is about. Last few weeks, we have talked about Jesus walking on water. If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what does. But at the end of that section that we read, it ended with the disciples basically saying, surely he is the Son of God, bowing down, worshiping him. Then the next section we looked at was, who do you say that I am? Jesus was asking them, who do you say that I am? And Peter, of course, responds, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then last week, we talked about Jesus predicting his death and his resurrection, right? Like, it's a big deal. Jesus is trying to get attention, and he's trying to let people know what is going to be happening. Now, Jesus today is kind of like the ultimate attention getter, right? He's showing us who he is through the transfiguration. It's an interesting word. It's only used transfiguration while referring to the transfiguration, right? But this is a mind-blowing event, one that Teddy just read. But the thing is, it's interesting. When you're trying to get attention, it's rarely to three people, right? You think, let's take this whole mass. Why didn't he do that with the feeding of the 5,000? Why didn't he turn bright as his face like the sun when he had 5,000 people plus in front of him, right? Like, why didn't he do it then? Why did he wait until it was just Peter, James, and John to reveal himself in this way? It says in verse 2 that he transfigured before them. This word transfigured, though, is a unique word. Like I said, it's only used with this exact thing. But the word in Greek is used a couple other times in the New Testament. In Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed, right? That's another way of transfigured. It's transformed by the renewing of your mind. It also means the word change. Also in 2 Corinthians 3:18, and we all, who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory, are being transformed into his image with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. There's something about this transformation, this difference that people see in Jesus. Now, Jesus was transformed right in front of them. He was different. He looked different. It says his face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light. Now, I don't know if you've ever looked at the sun, but it's pretty piercing, right? Like on those bright days, it can hurt if you look at the sun. You're told not to look directly at the sun, right? For those reasons. But and then his clothes became as white as the light. I almost think like if you were here during the Christmas season and you saw the white cloth on the cross and the light behind it, I almost feel like that's what it was. It was like translucent. It was like that. But can you imagine experiencing this? If you were Peter, James, and John experiencing this, but that's only part of it, right? Like, in front of them appeared Moses and Elijah, and they knew it was Moses and Elijah in front of them. These two people that they had heard all about, but they had never met because they lived during a completely different time. Now, wouldn't you love to know what they're talking about? Right? Matthew does not tell us, but Luke does, kind of. Not in detail, but he does say that in chapter 9, verse 31 of Luke, speaking about his exodus from the world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. So they're talking about him leaving. They're talking about him leaving the earth. Now, Jesus is planning on leaving. He had already told the disciples this, and this conversation was confirming what Jesus had already told them. Matthew also doesn't mention that the disciples fell asleep. Now, I think this is interesting. Now, Luke says they were asleep and woke up. I almost think this is almost a little bit more metaphor, almost. It could be. They could have actually physically fallen asleep. But what if it was more of an epiphany? What if they were asleep and a light bulb went off? What if they were blind and they were able to see? What if they finally realized what Jesus was telling them, and it was an epiphany of who Jesus was? In verse 4, Peter says, "Lord, it is good for us to be here." And I like that. It is good for us to be here. We needed this moment, right? We all need moments like this, where it's good for us to be here. There are times in our lives where we experience something and we don't want to leave. And I think this is one of those times, especially for Peter, right? This is called a mountaintop experience. Like, this might have been not the original mountaintop experience, but it was one of the legit mountaintop experiences of Scripture. Right? It is a life-changing thing. So when I think about life-changing mountaintop experiences, Peter had a lot of them. And I was trying to think through my life, what would be the mountaintop or life-changing experiences in my own life? Right? Meeting Jenny, that's a pretty big experience. Maybe holding Teddy and May for the first time, that's a big life-changing experience. Going to IWU. Going to Indiana Wesleyan was a big experience for me. Saying yes to God for ministry, that was a big eye-opening moment. First mission trip, it was a big life-changing moment. I think mountaintop experience is different, right? Like, it's one of those once-in-a-lifetime things. And when you think about one of those once-in-a-lifetime things, it's almost got to be that time where you meet God, right? That time where you finally realize who Jesus is. Now, I think throughout my life I can find different places where I realized who God was, right? With Peter, Jesus came and told him, "Come and follow me," and he did. But throughout that time, there was these experiences that led him to know him at a deeper level. And this for him, this transfiguration experience, was a big deal. I grew up in the church. I was told about who Jesus was from a very young age. I really never knew my life without Jesus, right? But there was these experiences at Riverside Camp, which it might be your Frankfurt camp, basically. You can think about it like that. Or maybe you grew up at a different type of camp or some sort of thing that you had those experiences at. But Riverside Camp for me, it was that thing, that place. That was my mountain. And I would return there yearly so I could have those mountaintop experiences. From age 5 up till 18, I went there every year for camp. I loved it. It was one of those things. And I remember sitting at a table with Dave Beatty. Now, Dave Beatty was a missionary, but he would always come back for Riverside Camp, and he would spend a lot of time with children's camp, and he would meet with each of the campers individually to talk to them about their salvation. Right? It's a big deal. And I remember him sitting at the table with me and talking and leading me to Christ. Even though I had known Jesus for years, right? Like here I am, a 5-6-year-old kid, right? And maybe just starting to understand it. And basically saying, oh, well, I don't want to go to hell, right? Like that was probably one of the biggest parts. But as time went, as I grew, as I got a deeper feel of who Jesus was and knowing that there needs to be a response from me, I eventually got baptized also at Riverside Camp, right? We have these mountaintop experiences that impact us and change us. And I think we still need to have them. I think we still need to have them. I think when I finally said yes to ministry, that was a big deal. It was almost like a sanctification moment. It was one of those things that finally I surrendered everything because I think I was holding back from God, right? I think a lot of us hold back from God, but we find Him in different stages of our life. And different stages of our life, God's asking for different things. But we all need these experiences, and I'm sure that all of you have had mountaintop, life-changing experiences. But we have to realize, how do we react to them? How do they change us? How do we get more on board with God through these experiences? Like Peter, we probably did not want to leave. That it is good for us to stay here in this moment. But the thing is, Riverside Camp, every year I had to go home. I couldn't stay there. They could keep charging me and my parents for staying there, but it wasn't a winterized camp, right? It was only a seasonal camp. I had to go home eventually. I had to go home and live out Jesus in the world. I had to figure out how to live out Jesus in school and in youth group. I had to figure out how to do it in my family, and we continue to do that each and every step of the way, right? We're learning how to live Jesus out in the world. Now, Peter's instinct is to do something, though, right? As he experiences Jesus, as he sees this bright, shiny light, Jesus reflecting at him, his instinct was to work and do instead of worship and be, right? Now, I think we do a lot of our lives trying to work and do, right? Because it makes sense to us. So we make this to-do list of all the things that we have to do, and we try to do them. We try to achieve them all. We do not take times in our lives just to be with Jesus. I think we need to do that a lot more than we actually do, is to just spending time with Jesus. Going from, however, we rather do all these things, to go from one event to another, serving here or there. Sometimes we just get so involved and so busy that we miss out being with Jesus. Sometimes we are so busy doing things for Jesus, we miss out being with Jesus. And this is why so many Christians, I think, are struggling. And so many people are missing out on Jesus because we're always going from one thing to the next to the next. If you have an agenda, if you have this to-do list, how easy is it to go from one thing on that list to another, and in between you run into a friend that needs Jesus, but you're like, oh, I have to go do this thing for Jesus. It's easy to miss out on what Jesus wants you to do if you're not spending time with Him. Right? Sometimes we just need to spend time with Jesus. I think we still think our faith is performance-based. Sometimes it's about getting others' approval or getting other people's attention. Saying, look at me, look at what I am doing for Jesus, rather than allowing Jesus to do the work in us. We're not filling ourselves up, so we get dry. We get thirsty. That's why so many people are getting burnt out, because we're doing all these things for Jesus, but we're not filled up ourselves. One of the things that I learned at Riverside is TAWG, T-A-W-G, time alone with God. Right? We need more than Sunday worship. We need time alone with God. We need a regular time just being in His presence. Maybe reading His Word, praying, right? Being with Jesus. Verse 5 says, while he was still speaking, this is Peter, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my Son. Right? This is my Son. I love that line. Right? For one, there's this voice from basically nowhere coming down. This is my Son. So people automatically knew. And were a little bit scared themselves. That this is the voice of God trying to get their attention. But what he says after this is probably one of the most important things that we can hold on today. Whom I love, with him I am well pleased. God doesn't list off all the things that Jesus did and is doing. He lists the things that if Jesus didn't do anything, it could still be that description. This is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased. Jesus didn't have to do anything to earn his Father's love. His Father just loved him for who he is. And then, God does not make a list of everything Jesus has done. He just announces his love for him. Now, there's one extra thing that God says. Listen to him. Listen to him. And I think that's also important because the church at that point of time had spent their time listening to Moses. They had spent their time listening to Elijah. They had all these things being told to them by all these different prophets and all these different church leaders, but God's saying, listen to Jesus. Listen to him. Right? Now, the disciples had heard this before, right? A voice from heaven saying, this is my Son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased, at Jesus' baptism. Right? This is an amazing thing that God brings back, but he adds this listen to him on this. He didn't say it at his baptism, but he's saying it now. It's like he's passing off a baton saying, this is my Son, with whom I love, with him I am well pleased. Listen to him. It is his time now. This is his time for attention. The Father was telling them to listen to Jesus. Not Moses, right, who brought the law. Not Elijah, who represented the prophets. Listen to Jesus, because Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. And Jesus is what the prophets prophesied about. Why do we need to listen to the prophets if we have what they were talking about in the first place? Jesus is there in front of them. Listen to him. In other words, disciples need to listen to Jesus. Peter, James, and John. And it was their responsibility to tell the rest of them. Eventually, it got to us, right? We're the disciples. It's our turn to listen to Jesus. It was a command by God, and now for us too, right? Disciples' response. This is what Peter, James, and John did. Fell face down to the ground, terrified. Because when God speaks, it's probably a terrifying thing. Can you imagine? Can you imagine never hearing God's voice and then, boom, there it happens. This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. A lot of times when we're experiencing new things, fear in us rises to the top, right? We have a lot of fear in the unknown, in new things. Along with Jesus being as bright as the sun, it must have been intimidating that God's voice had on them. It's a lot for them to process. Our instinct is to be afraid instead of being in awe of His glory. Jesus doesn't want us to be fearful of His Father or Himself. He wants you to be in awe. And this is why when they fell face down on the ground, fearful and terrified, Jesus reached down. He gets them. He touches them. He says, get up, do not be afraid. Right? He didn't want them to live in fear. That wasn't His point. That was not the reasoning for it. They had heard God speak. Yes, this is a bit intimidating, and I understand them being afraid. This is a new experience for them. But Jesus didn't want them to stay in that place. He didn't want them to be in fear, because this wasn't something that they should be fearful for. When they looked up, though, they saw no one except Jesus. Moses and Elijah were gone. The cloud was gone. Jesus was no longer bright. But they would never see Jesus the same again. It was that mountaintop experience. Something changed in their life, in their demeanor. Now, maybe the disciples had started to get comfortable with who Jesus was and being around Him. Maybe God wanted them to see Jesus in a whole new way, and they definitely did that day for sure. Remind them of who they actually were with. Right? Peter, James, and John had this incredible experience. And it eventually, though, they had to come down from the mountain. Eventually, it was time to tell the rest of the disciples. It was time to tell the other people that they knew. It was time to eventually share that truth with the world. I think we all need an experience like this. Maybe we've become a little bit too comfortable. Maybe we need a wake-up call. Maybe we need to hear this experience, this love from God. Man, I think we need that. I wish He would get our attention. I wish that Jesus would even come here right now, and we could see His face shine like the sun. Maybe we would just get it. And let us experience that. What would happen if nothing else mattered to us than Jesus? What if our world revolved around Jesus than us trying to get Jesus' world to revolve around us? What if Jesus was first? What if we had this list and Jesus was first every day in that list? And that before we did anything, that we would actually just spend time with Jesus. What if Jesus was central? If our lives just revolved around Jesus? What if Jesus was everything? Right? What if everything was about Jesus? How would that change our lives? How would that change our hearts? What would we look like? Would we become transfigured? Would we become transformed? So that other people, when they saw us, they saw our face shine like the sun? Maybe not physically, but they would see Jesus in us. Maybe we'd start to look like Him. He'd take on His image and likeness along the way. What truth would God speak over us, to our friends, to our family members? Would they be in awe if they saw us by what God is doing in our lives? No, I think we need Jesus more than we ever did. People around us need Jesus more than they ever did. Because we're getting closer to the end, right? One day we will either individually pass away, And we won't have that time anymore to tell our friends. Or they're going to pass away before us, and we'll miss out on that opportunity. Now, Jesus has called, he has equipped us and empowered each one of us to take the gospel to the world. Now, it's interesting. Jesus said, now wait until after my resurrection to go share this experience. Can you imagine having this experience and having to wait on it for a few months? Or a year, maybe? We don't know exactly how much time there was. Can you imagine just holding on to this experience? You know, it's interesting that out of the Gospels, Peter, James, and John, John doesn't write about this experience. Luke, Mark, and Matthew do. 3 of the people that weren't even on that mountain with him. But something stood out to them about that experience. Something stood out to them that they needed to write about it. Peter did write, and you can read about it in 1 Peter and check it out there. But this is an amazing thing that we need to know and understand, that Jesus changes lives. Jesus can transform your life. He can change you. I'm going to ask the worship team to come forward. And as they do, I'm going to ask each and every one of you, what does Jesus want to do in my life? Maybe we need to just take a moment to think about that. What does Jesus want to do in our lives? Is it time to meet him? Is it time to say, Jesus, you've been chasing after me for this, and it's time to say yes to you. You've been trying to get my attention for many years or months now, and it's about time for me to say yes. To say, you are God, I'm not. You're in control, I am not. I need to surrender to you. I may have said, I believe. I may have asked you into my heart at one point at a time or another. But I want you to take control of my life today. I want you to revolve, not you to revolve around me anymore. I want me to revolve around you. Everything that I do is for you. We need to submit. We need to surrender our lives to Jesus. Lord, we come to you right now. And we say, change us. Transform us into your image and your likeness. With all the things going on in our lives and our hearts, we can easily be scared. We need to learn to worship and to be. It's not about a performance. It's not about what we do. It's about what you do in our lives. So, Lord, if there's anyone here that says, Lord, it's time to say yes. Maybe you just reach up your hand and say, I want to say yes to you right now. To offer you myself, to offer you my life. And whatever it might be, that we just raise up our hand. Whether this is the first time or the 50th time. Just to say yes to Jesus. Lord, you are good. Lord, work in our lives, work in our hearts. I want to say yes to you. We pray this in your name. Amen.